Hello, Fearless Schools podcast listeners. It's that time again. Time to relax, buckle up, keep your hands at 2 and 10, as they say, and get ready to roll on to the road of pedagogical adventure. Where are we going to go? Someplace great. How are we going to get there? Well, carefully, thoughtfully, and with a trunk full of good intentions and a glove compartment packed with great ideas, and of course, probably some savory snacks along the way. And who's coming with us for the ride? Well, of course, it's you. Thank you for being here. It's me, Dr. Drew Tomlin, your humble host and middle school administrator with over 30 years experience at the schoolhouse. And normally riding along with me would be Dr. Ann McCarty, the Director of Professional Learning for our dear sponsors, Creative Leadership Solutions. But she's out there in the universe helping schools and school districts beyond our wee little podcast. She sends her regards and well wishes to everyone in the podcast world. And last but certainly not least is today's Fearless Schools podcast guest. So let's learn a little bit about him before we drive any further, shall we? We shall. Okay, so today's guest has been an independent consultant on communicating student learning since July 1999. He's been a professional development presenter in 38 countries outside North America, 47 states in the USA, all provinces and 2 territories in Canada. Oh my gosh, his 23-year classroom teaching career included experience as a geography teacher and department head at 6 schools in Toronto and Melbourne, grades 7 through 12, starting in 1967. So all the stuff that he knows, he didn't just write it on the back of a napkin yesterday. He knows a thing or two. So then for 10 years, and I'm not stopping there either, for 10 years he was a curriculum coordinator for Scarborough Board of Education and the Toronto District School Board after amalgamation. Wow. He is the author of A Repair Kit for Grading, not 1, not 2, but 15 fixes for broken grades. We'll get into that. That's the 3rd edition of that, First Education Resources 2022 edition. And also authored How to Grade for Learning K through 12, 4th edition with Corwin 2018. He's got so much to be proud of in the teaching world, but guess what? He also has a stellar athletic accomplishment, being inducted into the Canadian Field Hockey Hall of Fame in 2024. That's no easy feat. Oh my gosh, I want to learn more about that for sure, and learn, of course, about this keen educational insight. This guest today is the one, the only Mr. Ken O'Connor. How's it going, Mr. O'Connor?
Thank you, and thank you for that amazing introduction.
Well, thank you for having so many amazing things to talk about. I mean, goodness gracious, where do I begin? Obviously, we've got the questions all teed up and everything, but field hockey. When I saw that, I was like, I've got to learn more about that. How did you develop such a passion and penchant for field hockey?
Well, I grew up in Melbourne, Australia,
Okay.
and hockey, as we call it, everywhere except North America, um,
Mm-hmm.
was a sport that was available. There was a club in the community, and it seemed like a good idea when I was about 11 years old, and so I started playing with that club, and then played through high school, played in university, played in the club competition in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to Toronto, fortunately it was available here, so I continued and basically played, but then mainly transitioned into administering, coaching, and in particularly umpiring. And that's the
Wow.
reason why I'm in the Hall of Fame. I umpired at the 1984 Olympics and the 1990 World Cup, um,
Really?
and in total about 75 international matches. And so the work that I did in umpiring is really why I'm in the Hall of Fame.
Wow, that's really cool. So the umpiring, but obviously you're not a good umpire. Oh, maybe I'm getting into dangerous waters here with this question. Do you have to be a good player in order to be a good umpire? Or
Not
can you be a
necessarily.
good umpire with having never played?
Um, I think it's hard to be a really good umpire without having some playing background, but you don't have to be a high level player to be a very high level umpire.
Interesting, interesting. All right, and in a little bit, I could see some crossover already with your penchant for knowing about the world of grading and this umpiring as well. But we'll get to that in a little bit. To get us warmed up beyond field hockey, we always like to know about food. What's your go-to food in times of challenge as well as triumph? What do you go for?
Well, I couldn't come up with one. I actually thought about a meal. So
Okay, good, nice.
shrimp would be the appetizer.
Yes.
The main course would absolutely involve lamb and green beans, and the
Okay.
dessert would involve passion fruit.
Oh, passion fruit. Okay, so I'm gonna rewind that order. First of all, is the shrimp cold? Is the shrimp sautéed? What kind of shrimp are we talking about? Tail on?
Um, Almost anything.
Anything? Okay, all right. So, and you're not selfish about your shellfish, as they say. You like to share it with others, or you just
Yeah, yes,
and
yeah.
you'll share with us. And then passion fruit. So that's not a very common fruit. Where did you find this passion for passion
Well,
fruit? Is it something you
uh,
always had?
yeah, growing up as a kid, we had passion fruit vines on our back fence. So
Ooh,
I could just go out and pull a passion fruit off and cut it in half and um, eat it. And
there
I've
you
loved
go.
it all my life.
Awesome, awesome. So clearly, having access to something different and unusual in terms of a fruit is important, which speaks to the whole world of access in terms of education. You know, so let's get into that a little bit. You talked about your childhood. I always like to dig deep. You're an educational superhero, and all superheroes have origin stories, whether it's Superman or whether it's Ken O'Connor. So, what kind of student were you, and what, or even perhaps who helped you learn in those early years?
Yeah, I would have to say, looking back, I wasn't a good student in the sense that, um, and I don't mean to be boastful anyway when I say this, but high school was really easy for me. It was
Nice.
a long time ago because it was really about two things, about memory and the ability to write. And I
Mm,
had a good memory, and somehow or other I was blessed with the ability to write fairly well. And
nice.
so, for the most part, high school was easy. Um, if a subject became hard, I dropped it uh, because there
Okay.
were lots of choices. Um, and I don't think I became a student, or I didn't become a learner until probably
Mm,
second year in college,
okay.
because I scraped through first year, um, sort of doing the minimum, because I thought it was going to be easy like high school, and it wasn't. Um, and so I changed how I went about doing things in second year.
Mm,
Um, and I had a really major experience in that year in
okay.
an economics course, which was macroeconomics. And macroeconomic and school year, March to the end of November.
Okay.
Macroeconomics made no sense to me from
Hmm.
March till probably early mid-October. Um, and then somehow or other, about middle of October, the light bulb went off and
Interesting.
macroeconomics made sense.
Wow.
And so about a month later, the only evaluation that counted was a final
Mm,
exam. And
mm.
out of a class of over 200, because we were ranked, I finished fifth in the class.
Ooh.
And the message that I've got from that, and I think I've applied
Yeah.
and understood, is that learning is a process,
Yes.
and that if we have clear learning goals that are really the learning goals for the end, it should be the evidence at the end that is emphasized. I mean, in that
Yes.
course, if there'd been a whole lot of evaluations along the way that counted in the grade, um, despite me acing the exam, I would have got a much lower grade. And
Right.
I think I learned from that the idea that, as I said, that learning is a process, and that we've got to say, what does the kid, what does the student, what does the person know at the end? And that's what's most important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean that clearly makes sense when you say it. Say learn. Obviously, learning is a process. But there's and that goals. If the goals are evident, then the evidence should be what is at the end that matters most. Right? Is that what I'm kind of saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's
It's the more recent evidence that should be the predominant part of if we have to make a judgment. Our judgment is
mhm,
based predominantly on. It doesn't mean that we ignore all the other evidence. We have a whole
right.
body of evidence, but the evidence that should be the predominant evidence in making an overall judgment is the more
Right.
recent evidence.
Yeah. And so you didn't really get that light bulb moment until the second year in college
Yeah, I really
in
didn't
some
get it
ways.
till probably because that was right at the end of the second year, and then I realized
Yeah.
that as I went into third and fourth year.
Gotcha. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. But you know what? And it's interesting. We also interviewed someone by the name of Dr. Anthony Muhammad on another time during the podcast, and he said that he didn't really get the full understanding of what learning was until he was in college. Everything else prior to that was kind of rote compliance and doing the mechanisms of school, but not really being a learner.
Yeah.
That sounds
Well,
almost like parallel tracks.
yeah, when I talk about high school, I say in high school I majored in athletics and sports and minored in the classroom.
There you go. Well, field hockey, right? That's you were obviously a stellar athlete in field hockey.
That was my winter sport, and cricket was my summer sport.
There you go. And it's interesting, though. I mean, I know we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the importance of athletics in school, but sometimes that is the thing that allows kids, gives them a handhold on the mountain of school is that athletic opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So, yeah.
there is a rabbit hole there that needs to be looked at. I think is done incredibly
Go for it.
badly, and that is athletic eligibility.
Speak on that a little bit. How do you mean in terms of grading
Well,
and the?
athletic eligibility, when there are rules about it, most often is simply about grades.
Yes, it
And
is.
I, I think along your lines of what you just said, basically what we want to do is we want to keep kids in school.
Mm-hmm.
And there are athletes who are not particularly engaged in the class or who are not doing well. They may be
Right.
engaged.
Right.
They are kicked off the team and they say to
Mm-hmm.
heck with it. That
Yeah.
they're either going to check out physically or
Yes.
simply mentally.
Yes.
I think athletic ability should be based on um, engagement and attendance. I guess if they're there and they're
Mm-hmm.
making and they're engaging, doing the thing, even if they're not doing well,
Right.
um, they should be eligible. And then hopefully over time we work with them and their academic achievement will improve. But once we say you're kicked off the team,
Yeah.
that because your grades aren't good enough, for many students in high school, that's the end. They say, oh, I'm out of here physically or
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I can't agree with you more on that one. I see that at my middle school that people talk about the dropout problem happening in high school, but I see seeds of that dropout problem starting and sometime coming to fruition in the middle school, where kids, obviously they're too young to drive off campus, but they're already, some of them are, like you said, physically there, but mentally checked out. And sometimes we have very talented athletes in our buildings that never make the team because of that, that GPA, that grade point average requirement. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that we'd get into the waters of athletics and grading, but they do go hand in hand when it comes to student access and student opportunities. So I guess why do you think that grading remains such a tricky or sticky widget and a subject for schools? Is grading truly complicated, or are we just making it overly complicated?
Um, I think it's difficult because everybody experienced it, and people that are successful think that the way it was done must be okay because they were successful, and they
Yeah.
are often the people that are controlling things or speaking out the most. So I think that's the first part of it, and I think it shouldn't be complicated, I guess is the way I would put it. If
Okay.
we are clear about the purpose of grades, and I believe that should be that it's to communicate about student achievement and student achievement only. How are they achieving on whatever goals we've said the learning is about? So it starts with clarity about purpose, and then it's about four conditions for grades. That
Let's go
grades
for it.
need to be consistent, accurate,
Mm-hmm.
focused, and meaningful. And I think if we put together clear purpose with calm, then it's not complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. The four things: consistent, accurate, learning focused, and meaningful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you said they shouldn't be complicated, but I think what's interesting, I love how you started with it, that everybody has experienced grading as a student, and even if they had another career, everyone has been evaluated in some way, and because of their personal history and experience, it colors how they grade kids now. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more that that, that it's non-educators, parents, the way they see
Mm,
grades, and
yeah.
to a large extent, it's also teachers because I mean, I know, I mean, you just mentioned Dr. Muhammad. I've heard other presenters in education, like professional development, describing their school experience as not exactly being success. But I
Hmm.
think that's the exception rather than the rule. Most teachers did well in school. And so I think that's why it's really difficult sometimes, especially at the high school level, to say to teachers, we really should be doing grading a different way than when you went to
Right.
school.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. That. So what would be that different way? So let's unpack that a little bit, because some people would be happy to learn about 5 ways or even 10 ways to fix those grading practices to get out of the roundabout, if you will, of where we're stuck. Your book talks about 15 fixes for broken grades. So that's amazing. How did you arrive at 15? And if you had to choose your top five, um, what would those top five be and why?
Yeah. Well, you said, how did I arrive at them? Going way back, 1995, I had an article published in the NAS Bulletin that was entitled Eight Guidelines for Grading. Um, and I came up with those after um, doing some reading, some thinking. And then in the early 2000s, um, somebody said to me, some of those guidelines are too broad. You need to make it sort of, in a sense, more practical, narrow them down.
Yep, whatever you
And
want.
so some of those eight guidelines broke them down into component parts. And it ended up as being 15. I mean, there was no particular reason why it's 15. I didn't set out for it to be 15.
Right. Okay. So yeah, if you picked like out of those 15, so they're grouped into different aspects of it. If there were, any that were particularly salient that you're like
Yeah.
these
Well,
five, or I know it's hard to pick out of the 15, but like
yeah. Well,
if you
I'll
had
say
to.
I'll give you five, although one of them is a group. Okay.
Aha. Okay,
Um,
that makes sense.
Number one is that grades need to be standards, learning goals based. We need,
Got it.
when we gather information about student achievement, it needs to be how are they doing on the component parts of the learning? Because that's the valuable information, valuable for kids, valuable for teachers, valuable for students. Simply having an overall grade for a subject or basing grades on tests, assignments, and projects doesn't give
Right.
us very useful information. The useful information is they're reading well, their writing is terrible, their speaking is great, and however we break down subjects.
Right.
That's,
Yep.
to me,
Yep.
that's number one. Number two is that for making those judgments, we should be using a limited number of proficiency levels. Um, and by a limited number, I mean somewhere between 2 and 7. Um, Obviously, there's no point in doing less than 2.
Right.
And I don't think it should be any more than 7 because what's critical is we have to be able to describe those levels so it's
Hmm.
clear how one level is better than the level below and not as good as the level above. And I
Gotcha.
don't think our language, whether we're working in English, French, or whatever, uh, is good enough to uh, determine in a way that we can be consistent in those judgments more than 7 levels. So it's sort of interesting that
Yeah.
International Baccalaureate is 7 levels, AP is 5 levels. What
Hmm.
has come to be the case in standards-based grading, most commonly 4 levels. Um, but I don't think there's an absolutely magic right number of levels, except that it's between 2 and 7. It's
Got it.
certainly not
Got it.
100. I mean, I
No. We don't want
Uh,
that.
the maybe the number one change we need in education is the elimination of percentages. They
Mm,
create a lot of our problems. Um,
okay.
the third really important one would be making the distinction between practice and performance. That
Aha.
we don't put a number on everything kids do. Some of it is practice, some of it is the learning part. When it's
Yep.
okay to make mistakes, when it's okay
Yep.
to take risks, when it's okay not to get it for a while.
Right.
That's the whole
Right.
idea of practice, of formative assessment, if you like. And
Yeah.
so, formative assessment practice should get feedback, words, uh,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
eventually because there are some good reasons and some not so good reasons why we have to have summary judgments, then we use the evaluative assessments, um, summative assessments, whatever terminology you want to use. That's where the evidence should come from for determining those summary judgments. Um, the next one will be one that we've already talked about, and that is emphasizing the more recent evidence. Um, and so not using averaging is the obvious connection there. And then the fifth one would be um, that grades must be about achievement only, that we don't have any behaviors in there. And
Mm,
so the specifics of that, which are really fixes 1 to 6, are things like no late penalties, no extra credit,
right.
no um, no mark penalties for academic
Right.
dishonesty. It's a behavior. No
Right.
including of attendance in grades
Mm-hmm.
directly,
Yep.
and no group scores in grades.
Mm-hmm.
They're all
Gotcha.
behaviors that have found their way into grades. And the net result is we don't know what grades mean.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, no, that means a lot. I mean, because I wouldn't say at my school, but there are times when in years past, teachers have given kids a bonus points for bringing in Kleenex or for bringing in, wipe off things that they could wipe off tables with, and all that does is mask what student achievement actually is. So yeah, that has to be achievement only for sure.
and I have to say that I'm very embarrassed when I say that living in Ontario because our Minister of Education, and I won't put an adjective in front of that, um, although I would like to, um, just last week, because he sees a problem with absenteeism,
Hmm.
has mandated that 10% of grades for grades 9 and 10, and 15%, no, maybe the other way, 15 for 9 and 10, 10% for 11 and 12 will be based on attendance, and
Mm.
it's just horrendous. And I'm
Yeah, yeah.
embarrassed to live in Ontario at the moment.
Well, every country is working on something when it comes to their educational system, and
Yeah,
no one's got it all the way right. Yeah, and attendance that's a tough one, but to tie that to actual grades, I can see where that would definitely
I
smack in the
mean,
face of
coercion isn't going to get kids back in the classroom.
right.
If there's some reasons why I mean, there are mental health issues, there are issues with kids having jobs, with having to look after younger siblings.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
No, there's all sorts of things. I mean, what will get kids into classrooms is engaging learning
hmm
and worthwhile, and feeling that they can, and also what's really important is feeling that they can be successful.
yeah,
And that doesn't
absolutely.
mean successful, doesn't have to mean that immediately I'm going to be achieving at a high level. I mean,
Right.
I think Daniel Pink's idea of mastery is really important.
Mm.
That
Yeah,
mastery is seeing yourself getting better. So that's what we really have to focus on with kids to help them, even if they're not achieving at a very high level. If they can see themselves getting better or the prospect of it, they will
yeah,
continue to engage. As soon
yep.
as they see no prospect of getting better, um, to use a golf example, that's when I throw my golf clubs into the pond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and I often think too of education as from a story based standpoint, and that if students start to feel like they are minor characters in the story of school, and maybe even antagonists in the story of school, then how do we change that narrative? How do we change how they've characterized themselves? Like you said, seeing yourself getting better. So I even think about your field hockey experience. Like if someone early on had given you a bad mark or a bad grade in your early formative field hockey experiences, you may have just put the sport away. And then what would have happened to that potential for excellence that eventually came to fruition? Do you know what I mean? Like, how
Yeah.
do we make
And
someone
I
feel
mean,
extinguished instead of distinguished?
the example that I've often heard of that, or I've heard a number of times from educators when I've been doing professional development, has mainly been in math, where people said they intended to be math teachers until a teacher said to them, "You're not very good at math," or words to that effect,
Yeah,
and just totally changed the direction of their lives. When in actual fact, as time has gone on, they've actually found that they're quite good at math.
right. Right. It's interesting how, like, we when it comes to grades, we think about the numbers, and you've said about the damage that percentages can do, but it seems like some of the most important evaluative work comes from words, and giving that feedback. Can you speak about that a little bit more? How important feedback is
Yeah,
to
well,
students?
I mean, feedback is absolutely critical, and I think one of the things that we need to be doing in assessment and in communicating student learning is using words, not symbols.
Hmm.
So, for
Hmm.
example, if we have four levels, and the second top level is proficient, we shouldn't talk about threes. We should talk about proficiency. We shouldn't talk about fours. We should talk about excelling.
That's a
We
good
shouldn't
point.
talk about two. We should talk about approach, because those words and the words that describe those have real meaning.
Right.
4, 3, 2, 1 are only symbols. And the focus should be on the real meaning, not the symbolic meaning. And I
Right.
think we've tended for way too long to just use this, even as we've moved to standards-based grading, we've
Hmm.
tended to use the symbols too much and the words not enough. That's part of it. And the other part is that the only way we get better at anything, whether we're a kid, a teenager, or an adult, is when we get feedback about
Right.
what's working, what's not working, and what to do next.
Yeah.
And that, of course, requires words. And the best example I had of that in my life was having lessons from golf professionals. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as an educator, it's really interesting to put yourself into the situation where you're a learner.
Yes.
And I had, for a period of my life, I was a keen golfer, but not, but needed help at times. So I had
Sure. Sure.
lessons, and I was fortunate to have lessons from two professionals who were really, really good teachers, because they did a number of things that I think we should be doing in classroom teaching. One, um, they focused on a small number of specific things. So that, for example, they would say, do 3 swings. And they could have picked 50 things that were
Yep.
about my swing, but they
Yep.
picked three and they said, we're going to work on these three. Um, the other thing that they did really well was, for a little while in the first lesson and subsequent lessons, they would give me feedback about what was working, what was not working. And that obviously was helpful. But probably half to 3/4 of the way through the lesson, they would say, okay, now do a swing. You tell me what you did well and what you didn't do well, what you can do to make that better. Because they said, when you're out on the course, we won't be with you. And so
Exactly.
they really pushed the idea of self-assessment. And I think that is an absolutely critical skill that we have to develop in kids from kindergarten all the way through grade 12. Um,
Agreed.
because the ability to self-assess is actually the most important way that we get better.
Yeah, yeah, and I couldn't. My mind is going in so many different directions, all related to what you just said. It's amazing because I see it every day when I'm doing teacher observations. That's one of the things that we talk about is like how do you increase and have opportunities for self assessment and even reflection with students instead of the teacher always being the one to give that feedback. So what you're saying is just right along line with that. And then I also have parallels with the sports world. Not to keep on talking about sports, but like my sons are both college baseball players. And I remember when we were working on their game, I would say, all right, you tell me, what do you think happened during that last pitch? Or what do you think that happened during that last at bat? Because, like you just said, I'm not going to be out there when you're actually doing it. So I think asking those questions early kind of gets the mind trained to, yeah, what is going on and how can I do a better job? And it's just, and what needs to be celebrated too, not to make it always about the critique and the what's wrong, but
Yeah.
also what can be celebrated too. Oh my gosh.
Well, and it's
Whew.
interesting that you say that. This year, I have become a dance granddad.
A dance granddad.
Yeah, my 9-year-old granddaughter is in competitive dance for the first time.
Oh, that's cutthroat stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge industry I discovered. What I I went to the first competition she was in a couple of
Mhm.
weeks ago, and I was a bit skeptical. They even as 9-year-olds they put heavy makeup on and they have false eyelashes,
Right.
and I thought it's a bit beauty competition-ish. But
Mm.
there were a few things, but I'll just mention one thing that impressed me, and it goes along with what you were just saying about talking with your sons. In the program, one of the things that was in the program was an article written by one of the executives of the company, and it was about how to talk to your kids on the drive on the way home. And it was,
Mm.
don't just say good job, don't just
Yep.
criticize,
Yep.
do exactly the things that you were just saying. And I was very impressed by that. I thought, this isn't just the physical and whether they look good. And I mean look good physically, apart from the dance.
Right. Right.
There was a real sense of an educational component to it.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and that's how it should be for every endeavor, right? I mean, everything is about the learning. Then how do we articulate with our kids when they're in that moment? And believe me, the times when I've done it well and asked my kids questions well, believe me, there's lots of other times when I've completely messed it up because of the heat of the moment or like the gravity of the moment or whatever. I want to go back to along with those lines, our reliance on using symbols instead of words when it comes to feedback. Is that a result of just the teacher's life of like time? Like, do they have, and also like the scope of the work where it's like, if we had more time to give that more word based feedback, maybe we'd be in a different place. Is that so?
I think time comes into it, but fortunately now we've got some ways that we can overcome some of that. But I think it's more tradition, that we
Mm,
have 100-year history with grades and in certain situations how important they are or how much importance is put on them.
yes.
Um, the emphasis has been on the symbols. You get an A and granddad will give you $20,
Mm,
and or if you do get certain grades you'll it'll have an impact on your driver's license. There's been so
right.
much of a um, rewards and punishment aspect about
Yeah.
grades, and that's about the symbol.
Yep, you're exactly right. That meritocracy, right? I mean, it's the merit based. Almost, it's almost like a token economy. Like if this letter stands for this achievement that you'll get, or this punishment you'll receive.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
That's okay. So when it comes to so let's hopefully move it forward. We're continuing to do the work of improving grading practices. So what is your message to the various school stakeholders? You already talked about teachers and maybe a message for them. School administrators, what's the message for them, or families, or even students, or does everyone need to hear the same message about improving grading practices? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's basically the same message that, and I'll use my acronym that we need to be calm. That it's about consistency. It shouldn't be a matter
Hmm.
of chance
Yep.
which class you're in. It's about accuracy, which is partly quality assessment, but partly not including behaviors and some other things. It's about being learning focused. It's about seeing learning as a process, emphasizing more recent evidence, involving kids, and not including practice in grades. And it's about making grades meaningful by having them based on standards, on learning goals, not on
Yeah,
assessment methods.
there you go.
And I think that should be that's really the same message for everybody.
There you go. Yeah, and I just want to make sure, in case audience you tuned out for a quick second, just consistency, accuracy, learning focused, and meaningful. I'm going to tattoo that somewhere on myself so I never forget it too. Because it never ends. It never ends. Anybody who either works in a school or has kids in a school or whatever, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or even college, you worry about that evaluative mark and how they're doing. But if we remain calm, whether giving grades or receiving grades, I think it'll be all right. Oh my goodness gracious! As a superhero, Mr. O'Connor, not only did you have an origin story, which we appreciate you sharing with us, but you got superpowers. So just to pat yourself on the back with all the work that you've done in this field, what are your superpowers? Superpowers that kind of help you do your work.
Yeah, I mean, often people describe me as a researcher, and I don't see myself as a researcher.
Okay.
Not very little of what I've done is original. Uh, I'm an analyzer, a compiler, and an interpreter.
Ooh.
And I think those are the things that I do well. And certainly how I started, and I think how I've continued. There are lots of great minds out there
Mm.
who say or write little pieces, and then you put it and you can put it together in a different whole, I guess would be the way I would
Yeah.
put it.
Absolutely. No, it's like your shrimp. You it's like your meal. It's fun because like when you answered the food question, it wasn't just one food. You actually put the meal together. So it sounds like a lot of your work, your superpower, is the ability to put a meal together, to see those little plates and see how they work together. So analyzer, synthesizer, and compiler. I mean, that's it. Okay, so now on the other side of that coin, every hero has a Achilles heel. So, what is your kryptonite? What challenges your work, or what's that gravel in your craw, or burr in your saddle, as they say.
I would say bad policies or procedures. Um,
Ah,
like what's just happened in Ontario, like what I see in some schools where the teachers are required to have one grade per week or two
mm,
grades per week, which goes
right.
completely against the idea that learning is a process. Those are the things that drive me nuts and that
Yeah,
often are very difficult to get changed because they've been ingrained in the system.
right. That tradition you
Yeah.
said. And is it harder to change? It sounds like macro level things, like you said, policies, and
Yeah,
then micro level things.
I think it's harder to change the macro level. I mean, I think, individual schools, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me is that the schools where you can see them having been consistently doing standards-based grading and doing it well for quite a number of years are the elite, mainly
Mm,
American international schools. They're
mm,
independent schools that, up to a point, I mean, they sometimes have some minimal government regulation, but up to a
right.
point, they can do whatever they want to do. And
Interesting.
um, all around the world that I've experienced, the the elite international schools have been doing standards-based grading for quite a number of years,
Yeah.
and it's because it's the right thing to do, and they're able to say this is the right thing to do. We want to be cutting edge, so we'll do this. Whereas um, even when you get to a district level, sometimes that becomes more difficult. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, there are certainly it's not uh, and like as we see, as I'm seeing in Ontario at a provincial level, partly because it
Mhm.
becomes more political, it becomes
Yeah.
increasingly difficult.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I
years
guess
ago,
it's.
we have provincial report cards for
Uh-huh.
kids. And years ago, on the high school report card, they put it in the course median. Um, and the educators, well, we didn't really want that. And so we
Right.
said, why is the course median there for each course? And they said the politicians, because ultimately it was approved by the politicians, said it's because parents want it. Well, they didn't have any evidence. They didn't say they surveyed 5 parents or 50,000 parents.
Uh-huh.
Their justification was well, they're the politicians who had the final say. So it's really difficult to change that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can I, to go back to not to go back to standards based grading too much, but why do you think it is so difficult? I've seen it flourish and work well at elementary school level, but for some reason, once we get into grade bands 7 through 12 and into high school, standards based grading becomes really troubling or a challenge. Do you see that too in your work?
I see it, but I don't think it should be the case. um, because really our learning goals are that if we have standards for elementary, we have
Yeah.
standards for middle, and we should be standards based. And I think it's because certainly at high school of the external reasons for grades, and somehow the justification is, well, we've got to do it the way we always did it because of college
Right.
admission or so on.
Ah.
Uh, um, so that I think is a difficulty. I mean, I really believe that we should not have subject grades. Um, I mean, if I could set up my semi-ideal system, we would only have
Mm-hmm.
subject grades for grades 11 and 12 because you only need
Mm,
2 years for college admission. Um, Absolutely,
interesting.
I see no reason for subject grades, grade 8 and below. Um,
Interesting.
um, there's no really external reasons for subject grades. I don't think it's going to change probably all that much at 9 and 10, but I mean, how a student performs in grade 9 is irrelevant when they're in grade 12. So 2 years of data for that would be sufficient.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. So you know you've spoken about so many different best practices out there. Is there any best practice that's going on that you've observed or researched recently that's either raising one eyebrow, curiosity eyebrow, or both eyebrows? Like, oh my gosh.
I think the best practice that raises eyebrows but should be seen as a given is
Hmm.
reassessment. Um,
Yes,
Again,
retakes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if we see learning as a process, and I do not perform well when my teacher chooses to give me a summative assessment,
Yeah.
then that shouldn't be the end. There should be relearning opportunities. Now, reassessment is a privilege, in my view, is a privilege, not a right. You earn reassessment by evidence of relearning. Um, and my example that I sometimes use to illustrate that is first time I went for my driver's license, I failed. Um,
Me too. Me too.
yeah, I didn't even get out of the parking lot
Oh gosh.
um,
Okay, I went a
uh,
little further.
because I parked too close to the curb and it took me too many goes going back and forth to get out. But the evaluator said, you can book an appointment for a week later.
Right.
Um, um, so I booked an appointment, and for that next week, I practiced parking. And I'm pleased to say, when I went back, I passed the second time. Um, but it cost me. I
Yeah.
actually had to pay for it. We can't charge kids, but it cost me the time I had to put to practice parking, and I had the time I had to go back for the test. I would have far rather passed the first time, but the opportunity was there. Um,
Hmm.
and as long as I did the relearning, the
Yeah.
practice, then,
Yeah.
and that's what should be happening um, within the bounds of time, that because we are time based systems.
Right. Right.
But somehow or other, it gets criticized as making it too easy for kids. It's a lack of rigor. It's
Right.
unfair to the kids that get it the first time. Well, I'm sorry,
Right.
how I do, but if it takes me 2 times and it only takes you one, It's not unfair to the person who got it the first time.
Right.
Good for you. But I'm going to continue to learn, and that doesn't impact negatively on you who
Right.
got it the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's far more, I don't know if this is the right word, controversial than it should be, because it should
Yeah.
be it should if we value learning, it should
Right.
be a given.
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely a double eyebrow moment, because it's vexing as to why that is still a problematic topic in terms of retaking and giving kids another chance. Because those who argue that it's not real life, you've just given the perfect example of your own driving experience. And gosh, me too. I didn't know that I was going to have similar driving skills as Ken O'Connor. But it's like I do. We should watch out when we're on the road together. So, hey, listen, all right. So before we close out, we have kind of a tradition, but it's a new tradition, and I'm not sure how we're going to grade this. We'll skip that part. It's called the Fast Five. Do you want to take on the Fast Five, Mr. O'Connor?
Sure.
All right, you ready? And this doesn't have to come with any explanation. This is kind of like a verbal Rorschach test, if you will. I'm just going to give you 5 things, and you just give me your answer. All right, ready? Favorite historical figure?
And I'm struggling with his first name, but Douglas, Canadian politician who brought in universal health care.
Oh, nice. See, and I appreciate the Canadian twist of this, because I've gotten obviously a lot of stateside stuff. So Douglas got that. Favorite book, and it could be current or back in your youth.
A book titled A Fortunate Life that tells the story of a man who grew up basically in very impoverished circumstances, was almost an indentured laborer, almost a slave from about 9-year-old till through his teens on farms in early pioneering days in Western Australia. That was injured in the First World War, had a number of other difficulties in his life, but considered himself to have a fortunate life. Titled his autobiography, A Fortunate Life.
Wow, there you go.
It's an amazing book.
Nice. Okay, got to check that out. Your choice here: first concert experience or favorite concert experience?
Yeah, well, obviously there's a first concert, but I was struggling to think between. So I'll just say for the two of them, and you can put them whichever way you want.
Okay, sounds good.
Anne Murray and Garth Brooks.
Ooh, Anne Murray and Garth Brooks together? They weren't performing.
No.
No.
I think Anne Murray was actually the first, and I could see her as the best, but probably Garth Brooks was the best.
There you go. He does bring it. And then last but not least, your favorite trip to take, either real or to a fictional place. What would you say?
My favorite trip was one I took just before Christmas to Antarctica.
Ooh, Antarctica. All right. Why was that a destination of choice for you?
Well, it's been number one on my bucket list for a long time. I think because I knew that it was fascinating landscapes. It's difficult to get to. It's sort of iconic as a travel place, and fascinating in terms of wildlife, in terms of landforms, and just getting there and being on a ship through the area.
That's nice. I won't ask you to give that trip a grade. That would seem antithetical to our whole conversation. Goodness gracious. Hey, thank you, Mr. O'Connor, for joining us on this edition of the Fearless Schools podcast. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Drew.
Absolutely. Our listeners were driving down the sunny coastline of educational promise, looking for an exit ramp of opportunity, and you showed them the way. You just waved them on over and said, come on over, no guardrails here. You had plenty of insight, of course, and all your practical knowledge. So thank you so much. And that's how they get the know-how that they know how to do. And that's how we know that they know what they're doing. All right. Hey, guess what? Fearless Schools podcast listeners, you know what you did. You took time out of your listening lives to check out another Fearless Schools podcast brought to you by Creative Leadership Solutions. You should be proud of yourself, pat yourself on the back, and go to www.creativeleadership.net and then subscribe to and share this podcast with anyone and everybody that you know. Bank tellers, fortune tellers, truth tellers, wherever, whenever. I'm Dr. Drew Tomlin, host of Your Fearless Schools podcast, wishing you well and saying stay fearless on the bright road ahead. Thanks again, Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you.